other passages tell you that he's working for the high priest. And the scholars say that's an impossibility. The Sadducees would never be hiring a Pharisee as an agent, a police agent. That would be absolutely ludicrous, for the fact that he might be soft on the very people he's meant to be going out there, to interact with. No, that doesn't work. In the ancient times, that just didn't work. So that leaves you back with Paul saying, is this man lying about the fact he was a Pharisee? And if he was lying about that, that's moral turpitude. When you're caught in one lie, everything else that you say, right, is now, you have to be suspicious about everything else that the man says. Let's go on.
Paul, Judaism, and Christianity. The conversion of Paul on the road to Damascus. It was through this event that Jesus' movement changed from being a variety of Judaism into a new religion with a theology and myth distinct from those of Judaism. The high priest had no jurisdiction over the non-Jewish city of Damascus.
There you go, another amazing contradiction. He's meant to get letters. He petitions the high priest to give him letters to go to a town in which the high priest has absolutely no jurisdiction. But then we found, remember, in another program, we said that this Damascus is really a bunch of nonsense. It's actually Qumran. It's actually Qumran. It's not the Damascus that's in Syria. It was a code name for Qumran, and Paul is writing a story that ingratiates himself with the Qumranis, that is the Essenes. Now, we wouldn't have known anything about them except that the Dead Sea Scrolls were dug up. You see, because the Essenes were a forgotten people. Josephus makes a couple of passing references to them, calls them the fourth sect. But there was no substantial, knowledge that shook the world until the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered. But as we've also said, this Qumrani sect of Essenes would never have allowed a Roman citizen to be part of their... That would be bringing in a spy. That would be bringing in somebody that could be bribed. The Romans are the Antichrist, if you want to use that phrase. They're the most hated thing that there is. Romans need not apply. So now it all bounces back on the biography that Paul is telling you that he is. The thing just doesn't make sense. And we are then going to take this as actual history? You'd be insane to do so. Let's go on.
On the face of it, Paul's doctrine of Jesus is a daring form of Judaism. Paul was advocating a doctrine that seemed to have far more in common with pagan myths than Judaism. That Jesus was a divine human person who had descended to earth from the heavens and experienced death for the express purpose of saving mankind. The very fact that the Jews found this doctrine new and shocking shows that it plays no role in the Jewish scripture.
Look at that. So even the doctrine that he ends up preaching is suspect to the mainstream Jewish mindset. So we had some biographical info, and none of it makes sense. And then the actual doctrine, none of it makes sense. Therefore, he was an agent of a force that had its own specific agenda. And that is the part that no one in the official, halls of power of Christianity wants to accept. You'll never hear that from any official cleric. Let's go on.
Gaslighting the world. Yet Paul was not content to say that his doctrine was new. On the contrary, he wished to say that every line of the Jewish scripture was a foreshadowing of the Jesus event as he understood it, and that those who understood the scripture in any other way were failing in comprehension of what Judaism had always been about.
A pathetic attempt to re-script the whole of Judaism. Talk about madness. He's now going to re-engineer. He's going to he's going to backpedal, and he's going to go back to the whole history of Judaism and try to dismiss it by saying everything that happened in the history of the Jews and in their religion is merely a precursor to the coming of Jesus. It's all about that. Do you think any Jew would ever accept that? Do you think anybody in the member of John the Baptist, remember that whole story that John is meant to be forecasting the coming of Jesus number? We've already looked at that, so that's nonsense. But Paul is so megalomaniacal, he even wants to tell you that the whole of Judaism can only be contextualized, right, as the precursor to the religion that he personally is now concocting. It's myth-mongering on an epic fucking scale. Let's go on.
There were those who accepted Paul's doctrine, but did regard it as a new departure, with nothing in the Jewish scriptures foreshadowing it. The best known figure of this kind was Marcion, who lived about 100 years after Paul, and regarded Paul as his chief inspiration. Yet Marcion refused to see anything Jewish in Paul's doctrine, but regarded it as a new revelation. He regarded the Jewish scriptures as the work of the devil, and he excluded the Old Testament from his version of the Bible.
Right. So here we're dealing with what could be described as the first real anti-Semite. I would amend that only by saying that, no, it's Paul who's the real first anti-Semite. Marcion is just reading Paul, right? He is only elaborating on what Paul is already explicitly, not implicitly, explicitly laying out. He just concretized it. So this is the birth of anti-Semitism right here. That's why it's very important that we cover this ground, because anti-Semitism is peaking right now. And it's completely unwarranted and totally paradoxical. We just given earlier in our introduction, right, that every single anti-Semite should be pro-Zionist. And the fact that they're not is such an overwhelming contradiction that you can just dismiss them as a bunch of fucking lunatics. Worse, genocidal lunatics. People who should have no standing in this world or the next. Let's go on.
The Jerusalem Church, the Nazarenes. The first followers of Jesus, under James and Peter, founded the Jerusalem Church after Jesus' death. They were called the Nazarenes, and in all their beliefs they were indistinguishable from the Pharisees, except that they believed in the resurrection of Jesus and that Jesus was still the promised Messiah. They did not believe that Jesus was a divine person, but that, by a miracle of God, he had been brought back to life after his death on the cross and would soon come back to complete his mission of overthrowing the Romans and setting up a messianic kingdom. Having known Jesus personally, they were aware that he had observed the Jewish religious law all his life and had never rebelled against it. The Nazarenes were themselves very observant of Jewish law. The Nazarenes did not regard themselves as belonging to a new religion.
Epic. Further confirmed by the Dead Sea Scrolls. So the Christian who's not up to speed on the Dead Sea Scrolls will be caught in this antiquated idea. Those scrolls show you what that quote has just said. That there were many, many differences, but the main difference was that the Sadducee party had split, and the breakaway sects naturally defaulted back to the oral law, which was actually similar to what the Pharisees were into. They were learned men who strictly obeyed the oral law. So the new sons of Zadok, the ones that were originally Sadducees, had broken away because of the Sadducees' collusion with the Romans, right? So they defected, went out into the desert, and became more aligned with the Pharisaic tradition. This would be Peter, Paul, and the ones who actually were in the family